we're going to move on into this chapter 6, part 2 series of our physical activity interventions. All right. So if you want to just remember from last time we talked about, and if you watched the previous chapter 5 video, we talked about that COM-B, we talked about the behavioral change wheel and how we go from our capabilities, our opportunities and our motivations, and then eventually lead to that behavior, through those interventions, the behavior change through those interventions, we can develop these different strategies to be able to apply to a person so that they go from what they were doing right now to what they are going to be doing in the future, which is hopefully a change for the better, and it's going to make them a more healthy, well fit person by what we're trying to do here, okay? So as we move forward, we're in that stage 3 section where we said now we're going to work on behavioral change techniques and different modes of delivery, okay? So it's going to be really important that we figure out what is it that we're going to do. Okay, this is really, okay, well, we've determined our intervention strategies and our functions, okay, and then we are kind of getting into those, like the policy categories that we talked about, which seemed a little confusing for the moment, but when you actually sit down and break it down, it's not like it's government based when we talk about policy, but there are things that will be conducted that revolve around governmental policies or facility policies or things like that. So it's not just set in stone for one entity. Okay, so now we're going to go into behavioral change techniques, and if you see right there, the BCTs. All right. So that's what we're going to be looking for here. So what are we going to do first is really it's going to be more about, again, step 5, because we had 1, 2, 3, and 4 last video. Get into that. So identify specific content of the intervention of which behavioral change technique will be used, and then decide which way or decide how to implement the intervention that you've basically come up with through all of this, background information, intervention strategy building, things like that. Okay. So first things first, let's talk about the behavioral change strategies here. So like it says here, they're active components of an intervention. Okay, they're active components. It's what's being put in there that you are using to help and be designed for changing a behavior. Okay, they are used, like it says there, to achieve a specific intervention function. Okay. And then last couple things here, there's a lot of different strategies. So there's, like it says, there's almost 100 different ways, behavioral change techniques. But of those 100, I'm going to go back to the one above it. Of those 100, you're going to use them in an individual way, in an individual manner. And what I mean by that is each person should not be getting the same behavioral change techniques that the last person got. And by that, what I'm saying is that you should never treat an individual the same as another individual, because there's different ways that those behavioral change techniques can work for that one person in the same manner, but just in a way that's more individualized. And that's really what we have to think about. We cannot be sitting there saying person A is exactly in the same situation as person B. There are subtle differences, and we have to pay attention to that. Okay. So what do we got? Okay, so in our terms here, there's different ways, there's different labels, different ways to describe, but ultimately, what are we trying to do? We're trying to solve problems. So if we actually pulled this up, okay, this BCT taxonomy, let's see if we can copy and paste and do our job here. So when we put this in, that's the old YouTube video. So let's go ahead and punch it in ourselves, okay? So it was www.bcttaxonomy.com. All right. So when we go in here, taxonomy meaning, the proper verbiage and everything like that. What we're looking at is, obviously there's a login, and of course there would be, as we go through. There's different systematic ways of looking at things. So systematic reviews, interventions, it talks about different types of things that we're trying to do in terms of our target behaviors. All right, there's some more interventions. This is just a way that we can, if we were to click on something here, like if we went to, the abstract for everything, this basically is an article that reviewed a way that we use peer support intervention, to support mothers to breastfeed. All right, another one down here talking about behavioral support for smoking cessation. All right, that is another one. That's a huge intervention, especially for wellness. All right. Development and evaluation of complex interventions in a low resource setting to develop a theory-based treatment support um, to improve blood pressure control. That's what we're looking at there. So theory-based treatment support intervention. So thinking about some theories that might have worked in the past that we can use to help them, to support them, so we can do a text message-based intervention to improve blood pressure. So see how a lot of these things are just, they're really cool interventions and how they're strategized and looked at. All right. So that's a really cool way to do that, but it's going to give you specific terminology on what you want to use. All right, and everything along those lines. And if you go to the about section, it kind of gives you, what is the whole process of it? Why are we developing these BCTs? And having this specific language? Well, because we want to be able to have a clear definition as to what we're actually using. All right. So, and like it says here, developing cross-disciplinary research. Well, yeah, because then we can have commonality in language, but then we can, and terminology per se, and we can then, use those specific intervention strategies to help the next person and the next person after that. Okay. So what is it that we're looking for? Okay, when we're talking about change, which behavioral change technique do we want to use? Okay, and it's going to come down to a couple different things. Okay, they're going to be based on the outcomes of your steps, the stages 1 and 2. So steps 1 through 4. All right. And then, like it says here, review the research literature and select the BCT, the behavioral change technique, based on the results of previous interventions. So you're going to look at specific strategies. Like, for example, if we took a person who was trying to lower their blood pressure, we just saw that there's a text message, SMS, text message based way of trying to create a strategy that can give us more hands-on, but don't have to be in person with especially in today's day and age. Where close contact is almost like non-existent. So it's just different strategies for that. Okay, but based on what you saw in your steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, which is basically the COM-B, all right, and developing the intervention change technique, will then eventually get you to this point here. All right. So with method 1, all right, it says, behavior change experts have identified which BCTs can be used to achieve each intervention function. All right. So again, that is taking what we found in step 3 and then select the appropriate behavioral change technique from there. All right. So if we're looking, here is really something, and let's see if I can kind of get this a little bit bigger so that's a little bit, well, even if it takes up the whole thing, we don't care because we can see the whole screen. All right. So, here's some of the terminology that we've used: education, persuasion, incentivization, coercion. Okay, that's great. But if we were to, let's just get rid of the text in the background. We'll get rid of the whole text box, actually. That didn't work. So if we get rid of the whole text box, then at least we don't have that annoying click to add title. There we go. So if we're looking right here, the education, persuasion, coercion, incentivization, and it gives you, like I say here, persuasion, you want to find credible sources. You want to give feedback on the behavior. Incentivization, you want to monitor the outcome of the behavior by others without evidence of feedback. Okay, so basically, are they changing? Okay, so there's some similar concepts going on here, but for each one, you're going to have they're frequently used. Education, information about health consequences. Well, yeah. We definitely want to make sure we're giving them the proper information so they can learn for themselves as well. All right. Persuasion, information about social and environmental consequences. All right. How, in a way to persuade them in a certain manner. All right. Go to the next one. All right. We talked about, the other concepts we use were, training, restriction, environmental restructuring, modeling, enablement. And all of these here are going to be in the same boat. Okay. And so you can see here, with enablement, goal setting, problem solving. For restriction, there aren't any behavioral change. Like it says here, they're linked to, a different type of. So restriction might be a little bit different where, it's a little bit more of, with restriction, anything has to be changed correctly, and it has to be done in the right manner, or by restricting too much, we can cause more problems. So very, very important to understand that part of it. But environmental restructuring, adding objects, prompts and cues, restructuring your actual physical environment, changing things around, all right? Kind of getting, especially if you're stuck in that rut, okay? And then modeling. Modeling is really easy because really it's a demonstration of a behavior. If you can demonstrate that you're doing things correctly, all right? So with the second method, though, there we go. There's that review of research. Okay, so what you're saying here is that if you're going to be an interventionist, so if you're an exercise specialist and you're going to become an interventionist for this moment, all right, remember, we're not psychologists, but what we are people who can provide a change manner without diagnosis. All right, so if we have people who are having trouble, that's where the intervention comes in. But interventionists can learn from other interventions. You see what was done before. Was the result successful? When you're looking at research, I know that, for this class in particular, we haven't really talked about research in terms of like what it means for things to be significant. But when you hear them, or when you read inside of the article and you hear the author saying with their words that this such of an intervention is significant, statistically significant, that means that it worked. It means that whatever they used for an intervention worked. Okay, so you're going to want to see those types of things. And then from there, as you see more of the similar interventions strategies working, we can start then creating a behavior change technique that will work because it's shown previously over and over again that it can work for, in terms of research, a vast majority of people without the advent of luck. Okay. So that's really what it's going to come down to for us there. So other things, so if we go back to when I talked about restrictions, and I knew this was going to be coming up, so I don't want to get too far. It says no BCTs in the BCT TV1 are linked to this intervention. So what they're saying there is that in terms of linking, what they're talking about is the BCT taxonomy version 1. That's all they're referring to. And that, like it says here, is the code, to code the content of an intervention. That's where we would look for more for those restriction strategies in that case. Okay. So I don't want to get out of our sequence of what we're talking about because this is going to go beyond of a lot of majority of what we're going to be doing in terms of our own profession. All right. So now that you've conducted these lit reviews and you've looked at what's working, what's not working, you're comparing, contrasting, this worked, that worked, whatever it may be, then what you're going to start to do is, like it says here, goal setting. Then you're going to start action planning. You're going to have self-monitoring. And then you're going to start reinforcing the progress. Okay? So with goal setting, all right, with goal setting, that's going to be your first one. But let's talk about, so not only do you have those BCTs for problem solving, you're also going to want to understand that at the, toward the end, after you reinforcing progress, we want to have that maintenance or maintaining of that physical activity behavior. Typically, when we look at everything, we look at everything from a standpoint of, okay, did they fall off? Did they fall off once and got right back on it? So we have to make sure that the maintenance is appropriate for each person. If there was a couple of mistakes in a 6-month period, so be it. Everybody is not perfect and everybody does not work on the same wavelength in that way. So if there are some breaks, it's okay. Not breaks in terms of length, but like there was a mess up, or as they would want to say in like drug, in drug related instances, a relapse. Okay, where you go back and then like, oh, I can't do that, and it was for a day, but you got back to it. Okay, we're good. So we need to make sure we're understanding what that maintenance is. So if we can maintain proper behavior, we can keep on going with these BCTs. All right. So with our goal setting, always want to work around SMART goals. All right. We always want to make sure that we're talking about specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-based. Okay. Now, what we need to understand, if we looked at each component of this specific, well, yeah, if you're saying I want to lose weight, well, that's not specific. Okay. Losing weight is measurable and it's attainable, but if it's not specific, it can't be measurable or attainable. So it needs to be specific. I want to lose 30 pounds. Okay, cool. That's specific. It's measurable because if you lose weight, we can measure it. It's attainable because 30 pounds can be lost, depending upon the person. 30 pounds is realistic for specific people, but there's no time base to it. I want to lose 30 pounds in a month. It's specific, it's measurable, it's not attainable, and it's not realistic. Well, it could be attainable, but it may not be healthy. Okay, so we got to look at it from the standpoint of also the health perspective too. But they're in a month. It's time-based, so we're still missing something. I want to lose 30 pounds in 6 months. If we think about it, that's about 5 pounds a month. That's specific, it's measurable, it's attainable. I think personally it's realistic, and it has a time base, 6 months. Okay, if you said 6 months to a year, if you get to it in 6 months, you get to it in 6 months. But it has to be specific because that sets everything else up to be more realistic. Okay, so that's what we're talking about in terms of the SMART goals. So again, 3 aspects here that we want to pay attention to. Things need to be challenging, but that's where the realism comes in. If it's not challenging, that person is not going to get the ultimate mind change that they need to change that behavior because it's going to be too easy and they probably won't get to where they got to be. So it's got to be challenging. These people got to work for what they're trying to do. But at the same time, it needs to be realistic and it needs to be attainable. We talked about it in the last slide. It needs to be very specific. And of course, there always needs to be feedback along the way because there are going to be times where you're going to have a hiccup. There are going to be times where you might have a better week than the previous, or it might have a worse week than the previous. So we always got to give feedback and get information from your person, and then the interventionist can give what they want to give back. Okay. So with everything there, in terms of behavioral change techniques, what we want to look for now is action plans, okay? We want to think about the action plan of everything. Well, what is an action plan? It's basically a way that we're going to create new avenues, new ideas. It's going to be a plan for success, all right? But like it says here, it's a plan for success, but it's concrete plans that specify the when, where, and how. All right, that will be then transferred or translated into actions, okay? So what we're trying to do is like it says, when, where, and how. So you figured out your goal. Well, when are you going to do it? Where are you going to do it? And how are you going to do it, okay? So so like it says here, implementation intentions are those where it involves developing a strong mental association between a situational cue and a behavior. And so what you use is, it says here, when and then. When my phone rings, I will then get up and walk. Okay, so you're trying to change a behavior by saying, okay, when something happens, you'll then do something. When the TV breaks for commercial, I will then do 30 crunches. All right, and then right before, then you rest, and then you sit back down and you're relaxing or whatever. When the next commercial comes on, I will then do 20 push-ups and see how you can kind of do it from that perspective too for someone who, can't get to the gym. And we can find ways and then you have your rest period and then you do something different. Rest period, do something different. Okay. So with all that action planning and then those implementation intentions, we've developed a plan. Now we're going to basically develop a way that we can have a situational factor, a situational cue come up, and then a specific behavior that can be challenged for that. And then what we'll then move into is self-monitoring. Well, self-monitoring really is that. You're recording your own thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and outcomes. Okay? Now, when you do that, you're also going to gauge them against what we would consider a standard or a goal. All right? So if you're still having negative thoughts, well, my goal is to diminish my negative thoughts by 10% by the end of the month. Well, then we can document that and see, did you have a negative moment? Did you have a positive moment? And go from there. Okay. With self-monitoring, there's tons of ways that we can do that. Logbooks, calendars, fitness trackers, and apps. Can't believe that the publisher doesn't know how to spell. So when we look at everything here, for example, they put up MyFitnessPal. All right. Super easy to use, super easy to document things. It's very easy to share with people. So if you're the interventionist, you can gain access by those people sharing their MyFitnessPal with you. Calendars are always great. There's tons of online calendars you can share with people. Logbooks are good because it's like at the end of each week, you can give it to your intervention person and they can, that person can look at it and say, okay, you're doing great. And then obviously there's other apps that you can do. There's other video-based things that you can do, things like that. Okay, so self-monitoring is really pretty easy, but the problem is people just don't know how to do it. All right, and a lot of times people do not do a good job of self-reporting or self-monitoring because they think that when it comes to what they're actually monitoring, they assume that you always want to hear the best. The problem is that when you're an interventionist and you want to hear everything, not just the good or just the bad, because if you're good and bad together is what we want, or positive and negative, we want to use better terms. We don't want all positive. We don't want all negative. We want to see everything in its entirety. Okay, so with self-monitoring for exercise interventions, what we're looking for are like it says here, exercise outcomes. Things like are you losing weight? Are you having emotional changes? Is your mood better, worse, so on? All right. What barriers were you able to overcome, or are you still trying to overcome to meet your goal? All right. And then from there, you can go into what we call our FIT principle: frequency, intensity, time, which is duration, and then T is for type. Okay, and that's based off of the FIT principle of exercise, which also is good because when you're self-monitoring and you see that the FIT principle is being put into play, frequency, intensity, time, duration, and type are all important so that you can start to develop a better, what we call overload, so we can provide our people with more intensity and more duration and more frequency and change up what they're doing so that they can get this stimulus that will help them so they don't stay at what you most likely would hear would be the plateau, where they just stop and they stay stagnant. Okay. Other ways of self-monitoring, what we call the RPE scale. And really what we think about when we talk about this RPE scale, so follow my arrow. And if you look here, the RPE scale is a 6 to 20 scale where I'm highlighting. But really it's a 6 to 20, but really what that means, it's a 60 to a 200. And that's more geared toward what your heart rate is. A 6 is more like a 60 on a heart rate scale. A 20 is more like a 200. So when you think about it, if you have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or a Garmin or any sort of heart rate monitoring device, you can see where you are. 60 is supposed to mean rest. So below 60, there you go. Okay. But if you're working at like 140 to 150 beats per minute, that means you're working at a 14 to a 15 on the RPE scale, and that means it's hard. Okay, it's challenging. 16, 17, very hard. 18 and above, that's where when you're trying to talk to somebody on the treadmill, they can barely talk back to you. If you're trying to talk to somebody during a workout, not that you want to talk to them, but if they're trying to give feedback or something on how they're feeling, they're labored because it's so intense. Okay, so that's kind of how an RPE scale works, but it's a way to monitor the intensity of your exercise. Okay, so there's your self-monitoring. All right, whether it be an RPE scale, whether it be any of those, the journals or trackers or whatever it may be. Okay, and so then we move into that problem-solving part. All right, now we talked about a relapse. All right, when an individual fails following a lapse in their activity. All right, and then there's the abstinence violation effect. So, when we talk about problem solving, we have to figure out how are we going to overcome relapses. How are we going to come over what's called an abstinence violation effect? And that's basically, like it says here, when an initial lapse causes the exerciser to believe all future hope is lost. So a relapse means that they probably are going to go back and try to not do it again. Potentially. Doesn't mean it always works that way. Abstinence violation, you can see, is that, oh, I did it again. I guess I'm all done. All right. And you can see where that can become a problem. Well, that means we have to solve that problem. We have to make sure we change the mindset, the behavior change, which will change the mindset to know that if you messed up, it's not all for nothing. It's not all lost. Okay? So we have to be able to realize that. So obviously this increases your probability of a relapse again or any other complications in the future. All right? So we kind of just hit on that too, but like it says here, an exerciser uses problem solving to manage high-risk thoughts, feelings or situations that might lead to an exercise lapse. Okay, so if we can use problem-solving strategies, if something does happen or avoid it from happening, that's what we're looking for there. Where if something does happen, we can get over it and move on and only have minimal consequences. Okay. So then we talk about how problem solving can help with coping strategies, cognitive, thought, cognitive referring to thought coping, how to get over something using mind cues, all right? Non-observable thought processes like self-talk and visualization. Self-talk, there's nothing wrong with self-talk. I mean, the old joke where, you could talk to yourself just as long as you don't talk back to yourself, because then there's like senility in there and everything. Yeah, it's supposed to be the lame dad joke or whatever. But really, though, self-talk is a good thing, and it's more internally. Just like visualization. Visualization is seeing what's in front of you and how to make that visualization positive. Self-talk is internal talk to yourself, to talk yourself into doing good things and overcome the bad, per se. Okay? Then again, with self-talk, it increases confidence. It regulates arousal or getting fired up, okay? Because arousal can cause more stress and more anger and frustration. All right, and then like it says there, it focuses the effort in order to overcome a high-risk thing that's going on or a high-risk situation, okay? With visualization, again, we talked about it. It's seeing, and then like it says there, feeling and experience in your own mind. You're seeing it and feeling it, seeing it and feeling it, and it helps because if you're constantly doing that through different strategies, like other things that you might hear with visualization is mental imagery, or sometimes you may hear it called mental rehearsal. A basketball player, they might be mentally rehearsing during their warm-up before their game because they're at the free throw line and they're visualizing that there's a crowd around them, there's noise everywhere, and they find ways to block it out so that when they do it during a game, they've already visualized it and it doesn't bother them. The inhibitions or those thoughts and feelings that come into the head will become disappeared or minimalized. Okay. So again, with it, now you're looking at, like we said, the behavioral coping strategies. So what are we looking at? Ways to develop that plan so that you don't have a relapse or a lapse in judgment so that you can basically manage those high-risk situations. Like it says here, their example is developing a concrete plan to prevent exercise lapses while on vacation. Okay, so what do? Well, does your hotel offer a fitness facility? Do you have to do outdoor stuff? Blah, blah, blah. You figure it out from there. And that can help you with your problem solving. I do it all the time. If I go on vacation, I like to be able to have a place that either has like a hotel gym or a gym that's within walking distance that I can go to first thing in the morning or late at night or whatever it may be. All right. And then there's different strategies that can, be taught. So you might have strategies that are taught to you that you can basically troubleshoot before the trouble occurs or before the lapse occurs. All right. And then another way to do it is something we call reframing or cognitive restructuring. And that's basically taking a situation and putting a spin on it to change what that lapse might have caused you to feel. Okay. And that's really important. Reframing is really, really good. And you are able to do it quicker because it's in that moment. And sometimes you might need that in that moment kind of thing. Okay. But also you can reframe the whole process of what a lapse is and not make it negative. Just understand, okay, well, I messed up once. I can go back, no problem. Okay. And by that no problem, you're saying, oh, well, I'm not, if I fail again, so what? I'm going to get right back on it and do it again. Whereas you're not feeling like, oh, I'm so over this, everything is lost, blah, 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 So, but now, so again, with that step 5, what are we looking at here? We're trying to find that, that concept that we talked about in the last lecture, chapter for step 5, for chapter 5, we talked about, again, is it affordable? Is it practical? Is it effective? Is it acceptable? Are there side effects? And is it equal for all target populations? Okay, that's what we need to be aware of. And that's going to define the last component of what we're going to select for our intervention strategy. All right, because now we're in that point where we're going to select the mode or the type of delivery of that intervention. Okay, and that's where it's going to become really important, because this is going to be the driving force for everything that you're trying to change. Okay, so what's the mode of delivery? Okay, well, the mode of delivery is how you're going to deliver that behavioral change technique to whoever it is that you're trying to change. Are you in a group exercise class? Are you in a one-on-one personal training session? Are you working with an athletic team? Who knows? All right, and from there, what you can then do is you can hit different audiences by determining what your intervention is. Okay. So example 1, and this goes into the book as well, all right, is what we would call mass media campaigns. So like it says here, means for reaching a large number of people that are less expensive than face-to-face. Mass media is great. And you know what? In this day and age, mass media is pretty much free. Okay? It's basically free. Because the only reason why it's not free is because you either pay for a cell phone, you pay for internet, you pay for cable. Because look at websites. Yeah, I mean, anything that you could think of where it can appeal to the masses. I'm sorry, but we've gotten to the point now where Instagram and TikTok are providing more information than National Geographic. It's kind of scary. Although, obviously, where I'm going is that there's also some of this really crazy stuff that goes on with it. Or if you want to learn how to dance, and create a new dance, there you go. But no, and all joking aside, these, social media contents that we have, they're amazing. And they help us, as do the websites that are associated with it. And then with reality television, my thing is be very, the Biggest Loser is their example here. And you know what? The Biggest Loser, as crazy as it is and as far-fetched as it is, it creates a way that people can see that regular people can do something and get and achieve a goal, even though for them it seems like it's a lot quicker than really what it is. That's where you just have to understand that, there's a reality part to that Biggest Loser as well. And there's backstage things, and there's, things that aren't seen because the TV promotes it to be something amazing. But really, I mean, seriously, reality television can be crucial. All right. YouTube is great. It's still reality television in a way. The one thing though is the question always becomes, well, is it effective? Here it says that, it's mixed. There's a mixed signal of whether it works or not. Okay. And the other problem here is, like it says, the proportion of people who remember physical activity campaign messages is actually kind of small. So, although it seems like a great way, and it probably can be if it's done correctly in some way, shape, or form, is that people who are not avid exercisers, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other is what it's saying. So we got to be very careful of that, but we always want to catch that audience if we can. So mass media mixed out with something else, and you might have a good recipe for success. All right. The other thing here is, like it says, evaluations of campaigns delivered through new media. Well, it depends on what that new media is. Have mixed support as well, because it depends on, it depends on the people that you're trying to reach and whether they're using it or not, whether they're actually following through with it, etc. All right. Another way, like it says, is interventions delivered using tech or technology, telephones, smartphones, emails, apps. There's that social media networking again, or social networking. All right. It's crazy to think that your smartphone can basically, in some way, shape, or form, run your life, whether it be day-to-day operation through a calendar, through an app. It could be that people live and die by Facebook or, Twitter or Instagram, so it's the reason why it's amazing for a mode of delivery is that it's quick, it's instantaneous, and lots of people can see it if it's getting shared correctly. So that makes a big difference in what we're trying to do. All right. So, um, like it says here, though, it can help, with technology, you can help people overcome physical activity barriers like inadequate transportation or social isolation. People see that you can do things without having to go to a gym or having to, do this or do that, or, you know, how are people overcoming that? Because everybody's doing it, right? We see so many exercise videos out there, and one of them is bound to attract somebody like, oh, wow, they're doing it this way? No kidding. Okay. So I think it's really kind of interesting, that it can appeal to, everybody as it should, because there's always something out there for everybody. I find this to be interesting too, where there was a 1995 study where they showed that people who received weekly phone calls were actually more likely to walk regularly versus those who received calls every 3 weeks. It's like that added reminder, like, hey, blah, 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 you're going to walk. Hey, you're going to do this. Hey, you're going to do that. And then it's like, oh, call them this week. 3 weeks later, you get an update. It's like kind of like, again, out of sight, out of mind. So it's kind of cool to see some things like that. All right. I do, email is tricky. I feel like it says here, younger people. The thing about email is that it's quite challenging because I feel like email has been downgraded, and you can do everything through text messaging or direct messaging like DMs. And I think that it's still kind of like email. It's still electronic mail, but it's just done in a different format versus like, Outlook or Yahoo Mail or Gmail or whatever. But I mean, email still works. It's just you can kind of catch a little bit more people in different areas than you used to be able to. All right. So email is a good way to do it. But definitely looking at it from the fact that when you talk about, internet, social media, email, it's crazy. And I hate to use the word, but things are trendy, not trend, but again, trending, but that's the whole, it comes in quick and takes everybody by storm, and then it just disappears. Well, that's not always good for somebody who's trying to work on their behavioral change for, trying to create a better resistance training program or something like that. So you got to be very creative in the ways that you do this, and you can't keep going by the fad where it's trending this day and then 2 weeks later it's not, because then it loses all steam. Okay, so be very careful with what you're choosing when you're working with your people. All right, and then of course, just like anything else, face-to-face is always great, but it's really hard to get somebody to come and it's really hard to get somebody to come to a session all the time. It can be challenging to get people to get out of their comfort zone and talk with somebody, because sometimes face-to-face is too direct and people kind of come down into, like, I don't want to say a rut or anything like that, but it's hard to confront somebody about a change you want to do, because sometimes you get the embarrassment factor or whatever it may be. So what we want to think about is calling it an interview, so we can kind of just talk, and it's not so much a confrontation more so than anything else. All right. I do like it because, again, you get to talk about things, and you share how you feel about certain things. So motivational interviewing is really important for that. But it also helps with what we would call intrinsic motivation, or that feeling of internal pride and success. Whereas you're not getting the reward is because you did it for you, not extrinsic motivation where you're getting a reward of a gift or something given to you. Okay. So with motivational influencing, what you want to think about here is, like it says, expressions of empathy. Okay. So with empathy, what empathy really means is it's like an ability to basically identify like with another person, all right, or an ability to understand how they're feeling. So if you have empathy towards somebody, you're like, oh, I understand how they're feeling in that situation. Like, and I hate to be morbid, but like if you just say your mom died, and you had a friend who just lost their mom, like, you understand how they're feeling. You have empathy toward them because you understand what they're going through. When someone's like, oh, I get it, I know what you're going through, it's like, well, you better hope that person does, because if they've never had that situation happen to them, it's like, what are you talking about, man? Like, you can't relate to me. You never had that happen. Like, I can never be like, oh yeah, I get it, man. And he's talking about like reliving something that happened in like the Vietnam War. It's like, no way, I can't relate to that. That's crazy. Okay. Um, Development of a discrepancy. What we're talking about there with motivational interviewing is basically the person needs to understand that there is a discrepancy between what they're currently doing and the goals and values that they have to decide and what's going to come in the future. There has to be a discrepancy between the two. You can't change a current behavior if you're going to keep living in the same manner. You have to be able to have understand that to get from point A to point B, there has to be differences. Okay. The next part is what we call rolling with resistance. Okay, and that's really more about rolling with the punches, things like that, where you want to make sure you have what we would so a lot of times we refer to things like change talk. Okay, you basically are making statements that you're saying, oh well, I know I can do this. I know I have the ability to do this. I know I can change this. And that's more change talk. But you also want to understand that there's resistance to it. So, if someone's nervous about something, they're like, I might be nervous about such and such a thing, but I know that I can do it. And I know I have the ability to do it because I've done this, and so on and so forth. Okay. With that whole premise. And then lastly, supporting self-efficacy or a belief that you can change. All right, so supporting that fact that you can change. All right, so again, face-to-face approaches, as long as you're a good communicator and you're able to talk with people about that, then it's a quality thing. So sometimes it may be worth having that person exercise with you on their level. It might be worth having a Teams meeting or a Zoom conference or some other way of communicating besides in person, because if it's face to face, like FaceTime, any of those things, as long as you're looking at that person directly in the eye, you can see the emotion on both people's faces. That's what we're looking for. Okay. And then usually when you're working with other people, those people are more apt to stick with their programs. Okay. So again, just like anything else, when we're selecting that mode, there's those 6 factors again: affordability. Is it practical? Is it effective? Is it acceptable? Are there side effects to what this is going to be? And then side effects meaning like, what is it going to come from that? Is it something bad, good, etc.? And then is it equal for everybody? All right. And then lastly, when we're looking at that's stage 3. So when we look at stage 4, is that design. Okay, so like it says here, it's the evaluation of the intervention design. Okay. And that's going to be critical because you need to make sure that it worked. And if it didn't, how can you do something to change it? So like it says here, effectiveness is when it's gauged to the extent to which an intervention increases physical activity when it is implemented as part of a research project. So if it's effective, that means it worked. Okay. But we also understand that in the real world, there are some factors that come into play, and that we cannot assume that everything in the research world is going to carry over or be useful for a specific population. So we have to understand that. Although it's there, doesn't mean that it's always going to work for that person, even though they're in similar situations as what the research showed. Okay. So again, looking at everything, well, what do we want? How do we want to take this real world situation and make it work? We're going to do what's called a re-aim. Okay. It's a framework that's used that will help you in terms of your evaluation of really the physical activity change that you're trying to do in, like it says here, a real world setting. And when we talk about it, it's reach, efficacy, adoption, implementation, and maintenance. Those are the 5 concepts. The reach, how many people were you able to reach? With efficacy, what we're talking about is, like I said, the positive and negative outcomes of your intervention. What were the positives? What were the negatives? Efficacy could also mean effectiveness. So if we wanted to put that into play, I guess nope, not going to let me do it. But efficacy, we could also say, is part of effectiveness. Is it effective? And was it a positively effective, negatively effective? What happened? And then there's the adoption, okay? How many people actually adopted that intervention? And then implementation, how well is it implemented, all right, in the real world? And then that's how we're gauging it. And then maintenance, is it good for the long run? Are we in it for the long haul? And that's really what it comes down to, okay? Is that re-aim stretcher, the re-aim ability to achieve this function and reach, be effective, adopt it, implement it. Adopt it because you're like, oh, okay, we can adopt it, but if it's not implemented correctly, you won't be able to maintain it, okay? And that's really what it comes down to. But again, this is real world settings, not so much with the research component of everything. All right, and then lastly, with our last slide here, when you're doing, this re-aim analysis, all right, like it says, it can provide information to explain why an intervention did or did not work successfully to create an increase in whatever that goal change might have been, okay? But also what we can go back to is look at the re-aim, the REAIMs, and say, okay, well, where was our shortcomings? Okay, and then from there, you can then readjust your next step if it didn't work. If it worked, then we know that we have proof that it can keep going, and we can continue to change those strategies as the goals begin to change. Okay, but really what are we looking for out of this whole aspect here is, was it effective and did it work? And if it wasn't, we have to change it. If it was, we got to keep rolling with the punches. Okay, and that's really what it comes down to. That the stage 3 and 4 is really about making sure that we can develop a behavioral change technique and then keep going with it and find the right strategy for that success, and then finally evaluate whether it was appropriate or it needed a little bit of help. Okay, so again, chapter 5 was more stages 1 and 2, and then chapter 6 was stages 3 and 4. So make sure that you pay attention to both aspects because they run into each other, even though they're two separate entities in terms of the lecture. All right. So I hope everybody enjoyed this. I hope that you understand where we're going with this in terms of a 4-stage approach, that we can start with, okay, what's going on, and finish with, did that work or did it not work, and how can we make it work the next time if it didn't? Or how do we keep going if it did? Okay, and that's really what we want to focus in on. So I appreciate everybody taking a listen, and I hope you all have a great rest of the day.